Welcome to the Gay Liberation Network here on CAN TV. I'm your host, Andy Thayer, and with us is Irene Romulo of Organized Communities Against Deportations. OCAD has been very active over the years as one of the truly grassroots groups of folks who've been fighting not just Donald Trump's horrible attacks on immigrants, but also those of his predecessor, President Obama. And we'll be getting into who OCAD is and what they're doing in just a few moments, as well as our topic, which is the so-called sanctuary status of the city of Chicago, the so-called Welcoming Cities Ordinance, and what that all means, and so-called reforms to it that have been passed recently. But before we do that, I'd like to call to your attention a few announcements. First of all, coming up on your screen here, there's going to be a demonstration/press conference on Wednesday, March 4th, to defend the right to abortion. This is going to be on the day that the U.S. Supreme Court is going to be hearing oral arguments in the so-called Texas case, which threatens to overturn Roe v. Wade. So this is really a time for all pro-choice advocates to come to Federal Plaza Wednesday, March 4th, and show your support for women's right, for all of us, our right to choose what to do with our bodies. So please mark your calendars for that. Also, this coming up on February 20th at DePaul University, an event that is very much in line with tonight's topic, talking about why there is a refugee and immigration crisis in Central America. And as our speakers who are from the La Voz de los de Bajo, in an event organized by Chicago Area Peace Action, it's been U.S. meddling in the region, which has been the primary cause of the immigration crisis. And so it's quite hypocritical for the United States to be pretending like this is all someone else's fault, when the United States, when you get right into it, has been responsible for hosting dictatorial regimes, for example, that are responsible for all sorts of human rights violations. So check that out Thursday, February 20th at DePaul University's Student Center at 2250 North Sheffield Avenue. And then one more event that we want to call your attention to, and that is the threatened U.S. attack on Iran. The threat has receded for a little while, but if Donald Trump, for example, may be feeling like his re-election possibilities might be threatened, he might do what he did just a few weeks ago, do some very provocative action against Iran. And so there is an emergency response plan in the event the United States attacks Iran to meet outside of Donald Trump Tower at Wacker and Wabash, 5:30 p.m. on whatever day that the bombing occurs. But back to OCAD and Organized Communities Against Deportation. Irene, could you tell our audience who is OCAD, why you formed?
Yeah. OCAD is Organized Communities Against Deportations, and we are an undocumented-led group that organizes against deportations and the criminalization of Black and brown people in Chicago and the surrounding areas. We formed in 2012 out of what was then called the Immigrant Youth Justice League, which was a group of undocumented youth that organized and came out as undocumented, unafraid, and along with a lot of other organizers throughout the country, we're really behind the Obama-era 2012 program called DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So we started in 2012 specifically because we saw how the enforcement changed from targeting, specifically targeting people with criminal convictions. So we saw a lot of that sort of immigration enforcement in the city and decided that that was the people that we wanted to organize and focus on. So that's really where OCAD emerged in 2012.
Yeah, and OCAD, I think one of the really important things that is distinctive about your organization compared to a lot of others is that you don't say, oh, we'll only deal with the quote-unquote innocent immigrants, the people that came over here when there were 2 or 3 brought by their parents, but you believe in no borders, you believe in people being able to freely find their freedom, especially after some of the horrors we just spoke about in terms of what's happening in Central America. A U.S.-sponsored dictatorship in Honduras, for example, that led that country to having the highest murder rate in the world for several years in 2009, organized and sponsored by the State Department under Hillary Clinton and then President Obama. So I think this is one of the things that's truly remarkable about OCAD is that you are led by the undocumented yourselves. It's not, outside attorneys or quote unquote professionals, a big, fancy, wealthy NGO, but you're doing it yourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And we really believe that everybody deserves to be fought for. We understand the ways that our communities are criminalized. We understand the ways that our communities are policed and targeted, not just by ICE, but also by police. And that's part of the evolution of OCAD. A lot of these things are things that we have learned and, have adopted into our politics. And right now we're at a place where we do believe that we all deserve to be fought for, no matter how criminalized we have been, and we don't believe that detention centers or prisons should exist, and that there's other ways that we can address the harms that occur in our communities, and that comes really from us.
And if you want to get in touch with OCAD, please check out their website, organizedcommunities.org, and you'll find information about how to get in touch with them. And OCAD has an important event coming up shortly. So, Irene, I'd like to have you speak a few words about what this event is coming up on Saturday, February 15th. What can people expect, and where should they go for this event?
So aside from having our website, we are also pretty active on Facebook. People can find us under Organized Communities Against Deportations, and there you'll find updated events, updates about different cases, information about what we're up to. Our community asambleas are held twice a month, and these are our community gatherings that are open to the public. Usually it's people who are in deportation proceedings, their family members, or people who just want to learn more about what's going on and get involved that come to our asambleas. So the next one is Saturday, February 15th from 10 to 12. You can find the location on the Facebook event page. There's also another event that we actually just posted today. We found out that Jesus Alberto Lopez, the brother of one of our organizers, is going to be up for bond rehearing, which means that he has been detained since May of last year, and through a lot of community pressure, we've gotten the ability for him to go up before a judge and request bond once again. So we just found out about that today. We just posted a Facebook event that people can find, and if you can come with us to next week, that's where he is being detained, and it'll be really important for us to pack the courtroom.
And say that Facebook URL again, please, Irene.
You can search us with our Organized Communities Against Deportations on Facebook, and I believe the URL is OCADIL, so OCADIL, so facebook.com/OCADIL.
And this is how you can do some really direct action to defend people in our country. It's that one of the things that disturbs me so much is just how many myths there are about undocumented people in this country. The kind of myths you hear on Fox all the time about criminals and all this sort of nonsense, when the statistics are that undocumented people commit far less crimes than people like me and others who were born here. And you also, there's this myth that, they should just wait in line and go through the same procedures and not jump the line, when the line is stuck. It's been stuck for years and years and years. It was difficult in the Obama era. It's become virtually impossible, especially if you're coming from certain countries that President Trump calls, what was the disgusting term he used for it? I can't say it on the air, but this whole notion that people can come to this country and just follow the law and get in is a total myth. That may have been the case in the early 19th through the early 20th centuries, but because of racist policies of our federal government, it's much more difficult now for anyone fleeing repression, fleeing despotic regimes, which are more often than not supported by the United States government, to actually get in and avoid being attacked. There was a very frightening article, for example, the other day about a report by Human Rights Watch, which found that people who had been deported by the United States to El Salvador between the years 2013 and 2019, that at least 200 of them had been murdered and or raped and or mutilated, tortured since returning to El Salvador. These are folks that the United States, under both the Trump administration, the Obama administration, deported back to El Salvador, who were fleeing real violence. And according to this new report out by Human Rights Watch just the other day, some 200 of them were horribly victimized. And so this is the sort of thing that OCAD is fighting against. But
Yeah.
one of the things that I think is very important for Chicagoans to understand, and I'm still trying to get my head around it, was for many years the city has been known as a welcoming city for immigrants. But apparently that was more in rhetoric rather than in reality. And there was a so-called Welcoming Cities Ordinance.
Yeah.
Irene, could you tell our watchers what were the problems with that ordinance? What were the holes in it?
Yeah. So Chicago and many cities across the nation are often known as sanctuary cities, and that refers to having policies in place where the cooperation is limited between city officials and ICE. Here in Chicago, we have the ordinance called the Welcoming City Ordinance, which was adopted in 2012, and that prohibits certain collaboration between Chicago Police Department and any other city officials with ICE. The problem with that ordinance is that it has 4 exceptions. Those 4 exceptions are if people are in the city's gang database, if they have any criminal warrants or any past criminal convictions, and I always forget the 4th one, but
There's 4 federal warrants too.
Yes, federal
Yeah.
warrants. So the problem with that, at least the way that we see it, is that still leaves the door open for a lot of collaboration to happen with ICE. And at least us as OCAD and where our politics are, like, we don't believe that there should be any collaboration whatsoever, even if people fall under these. So for a long time, OCAD and a lot of other organizations have been joined in a fight to remove those carve-outs. And in 2015, OCAD and a number of other organizations in the city came together under the Chicago Immigration Working Group to organize and try to figure out the best ways to remove those carve-outs. And this was under Rahm Emanuel. In 2016, we saw something similar, like, as to what happened right now, but in 2016, that Welcoming City Ordinance was amended. There was an amendment that was introduced and that was passed that changed it and added protections so that the Chicago Police Department cannot use deportations to threaten people. There was a case of a worker who, it was clearly recorded where a police officer threatened her with deportation if she did not collaborate with what was going on. So that was kind of the impetus behind, like, wanting to pass this amendment. So that amendment was passed. It's great. It offers more protections. But even in 2016, Rahm Emanuel refused to actually, remove these carve-outs, which for us is the main thing. And it continues to be the main thing that we want. Most recently, too, like, we have been pushing our new mayor to eliminate those because, again, it's one thing to say that the city is a sanctuary city, and it's another thing when, it actually comes down to practice. So that's one thing that we have been working on. And most recently, as you said, there was an ordinance that was adopted last month called the Accountability on Communication and Transparency Ordinance, which similarly, like in 2016, right, it offers amendments that are good, go a little bit beyond, where the ordinance now stands, but still do not address the fundamental things that we have been pushing for, which are to remove those carve-outs.
Well, Well, and let's talk a little bit about those carve-outs for a moment, because this so-called gang database is something that is really nefarious, because you're not even, it doesn't even mean that you have any kind of probable cause for committing a crime to get on this, which is a very low barrier for the police to begin with, but they don't even have to meet that. You can be on this database, and most people don't even know that they're on the database. There's nothing where you have to prove, where the police or prosecutors have to prove that you're part of a gang. They just literally throw you on this database, and this is something that ICE has historically used to target people. You're not even properly indicted, let alone have a trial to determine your innocence, and yet you can be deported because of that.
Yes, and over 95% of the people that are in the gang database are black and brown young people from Chicago, majority men, and that's another thing that, just like in our communities here, like when I define sanctuary, I did it because it's very important to note that that's just one thing, right? But like some of the things that we believe in and that others believe in is that Chicago truly can't be a sanctuary city until every single person who lives here, including black people, including brown people, including trans people, everybody, feels safe and has what they need to live in the city. And the gang database is part of those things that are often in black and brown communities throughout Chicago that, target us for who we are. We know in the city of Chicago, there's over-policing in these neighborhoods. There's the use of artificial intelligence. There's the use of all of these different technology and surveillance programs that specifically target our communities.
Well, and that's something I think that a lot of people aren't aware of, Irene. Chicago has supposedly the highest number of the surveillance cameras of any city in the United States. And also, we found out that the Lightfoot administration secretly signed up with a firm known as Clearview AI, which is a private firm which illegally, in violation of Illinois' biometric law, scrapes social media for pictures that people have posted, and has developed this huge database which they are then selling to government. There was actually mentioned in a New York Times article where they had offered their services to a known white supremacist in Wisconsin, who says he was contemplating using it for deep opposition research. And this is a total violation not only of Illinois' biometric law, but it is also a violation of the 4th and 14th Amendments. Now, a little transparency on my part. I do work at the law firm which filed a class action suit against the Clearview AI for doing this. So just in the interest of being transparent, but it's notable that our interim police superintendent, who no doubt would not have done this without Lightfoot's say so, signed up with Clearview on January 1st of this year.
Yeah, and it's all of these different programs and surveillance and things that exist that still allow for there to be loopholes for ICE to collaborate with the city of Chicago to use all of this information and target people who are undocumented.
And we're just going to get a few pictures of OCAD activities up on your screen here. But while we're doing that, I think it's important to note that the loopholes in this current accountability on communication transparency ordinance, you just love the names here. They make up these nice, pretty names, but then the actual content of the bill doesn't match up with it. This so-called accountability and communication transparency ordinance, as we were talking about before the show, Irene, doesn't even have any enforcement provisions in terms of employment sanctions for police officers who, for example, might go ahead and collaborate with ICE anyway. I mean, what's to stop them from doing it? There's no enforcement provision in this so-called reform that Mayor Lightfoot has ballyhooed in the press. And I think it says something about some of our other reforms, but how would you respond to that first, Irene?
Yeah, I mean, the ordinance says that if police officers get any requests, they're supposed to report them to their commanding officers, make a note of it, and deny any request for collaboration with ICE. But as you said, like that enforcement is so vague, and it's representative of a lot of the different policies and ordinances that we've seen here in the city, where really it comes down to that enforcement. And, you know, are they being enforced? Like, what is going to happen to a police officer when they choose to do this? And even what we learned about most recently, when last year the Chicago Police Department now has a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Homeland Security, which authorizes some like City of Chicago police officers to be deputized to work with the Department of Homeland Security under the HSI department. I forgot what that stands for.
I can't remember either, Irene, but I think it's notable also that we just learned that Beck, the interim superintendent, has also set up a so-called counterterrorism bureau. And those of us who are around in the city during the 2012 NATO conference vividly remember how so-called fight against terrorism was used to frame 3 young men who were planning on protesting against the NATO conference. So what goes out under the guise of terrorism or fighting terrorism can be a very dangerous thing to people. And I think when you're looking at Mayor Lightfoot's promises, it's important to look at the track record, because what happened with this so-called accountability and transparency ordinance is very similar to what's happened with a whole series of things. This mayor, before the teacher strike, as a candidate, had promised all sorts of things for our schools in terms of nurses, in terms of librarians, in terms of staffing for children with disabilities and so forth, librarians, and yet it took a teacher strike to force that. It took these to get these reforms such as they are in this latest ordinance, the work of groups like OCAD to force Mayor Lightfoot to live up to her promises. We're seeing a battle down in Jackson Park about displacement, where activists are fighting against the former community organizer president to get a community benefits agreement. I mean, if they were really living up to their words, these would not have to be pitched battles in order to win these sort of things.
Yeah, and that's what I was referring to when we want, you know, the question is, will Chicago be a sanctuary city? And I am hopeful that one day it will be. But not in the sense that we necessarily think about, the very limited sense that we think about it right now. And I think it's going to come from a lot of organizing from the grassroots and listening to what people want. Because if people can't get their community benefits agreement that they are fighting for, if people are still being displaced from the city, then who is it going to be a sanctuary for?
Yeah. And I was just reading before the show that some 1/5 of Chicagoans are foreign-born. They're immigrants. Actually, going back to the late 19th century, some 75% of people in this city were born abroad. And so this isn't something that just hits a few people. This hits our neighborhoods. This can devastate neighborhoods if organizations such as ICE are allowed to run rampant. If people are afraid about being picked up by the police or ICE or whomever, then they're not going to report things like sexual assault and so forth. There's been a big problem with ICE, for example, hanging outside of courts, I understand, trying to pick up people who are simply doing their civic duty, reporting as witnesses or what have you, and it stops all that, this hyper-enforcement.
Yes, exactly. You're right.
Yeah, so we've got a real battle ahead, because we've already got a viciously anti-immigrant president. But let's not forget that the previous president was known as the deporter-in-chief. And so whoever the Democrats come up with in November, if he or she wins, we're probably going to have another battle on our hands, regardless of who is elected.
Yes, we understand that at least all of the work that OCAD has seen is that no matter who is in office, we're always going to have to continue to push them and organize to ensure that the most vulnerable in our community, the most criminalized in our community, aren't continue to be targeted, continue to be at that crux of enforcement, and always the ones that get behind and the ones that get targeted, and that we justify their deportations. It's always going to be, no matter who's in office, it's always going to take a strong group of grassroots people to ensure that, whatever we pass protects all of us.
And that's really the history of civil rights, regardless of what community, regardless of what cause you're talking about. That's why the Gay Liberation Network exists. That's why OCAD exists. That's why any number of truly grassroots organizations exist. So we know that the source of civil rights has always come from the people and not from the politicians. So I'd encourage everyone who wants to get in touch with Organized Communities Against Deportation to check out their future activities, to go to their website, organizedcommunities.org. And Irene, you mentioned that Facebook is particularly where OCAD shares a lot of information. So please check out, just search for Organized Communities Against Deportation on Facebook, and you'll get hooked up with Irene about the various activities that they've got coming up. And one of them is this Assembla Comunitaria. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah.
Irene, tell people really briefly what that's about coming up on Saturday, February 15th.
The asambleas are public community meetings that are held twice a month on the first and third Saturdays of the month. They're open to people who want to get involved, learn a little bit more. You can always come and find more information about them on our Facebook page.
And another very important activity coming up, the abortion rights struggle really hangs in the balance now, with the Supreme Court deciding a Texas case that could either severely curtail even more the right to abortion or outlaw Roe v. Wade entirely. Please check out and come to this press conference and rally on Wednesday, March 4th, 12 noon at Federal Plaza. And then there's also this very important activity coming up on February 20th, coming up on your screen right now. No one travels 3,000 miles without good reason. That is an activity that's organized by Chicago Area Peace Action, working with La Voz de los Abajo, the voice of the people from below, if I remember correctly the translation.
Yes.
And that is coming up on it's talking about, of course, how the United States has meddled in the various Latin American countries, causing the immigration crisis, the refugee crisis, coming up on Thursday, February 20th at DePaul University in the evening. I believe it's 7 p.m., 2250 North Sheffield. And then finally, we'd like to thank the various folks who've helped out with tonight's show.